Hello, friends. Today we are going to enjoy a ghost story by Charles Dickens. The story is called The Chimes. It's a wonderful ghost story. Of course, the English is Victorian English. I think most of us enjoy Victorian English. At least I do enjoy it. So let us go through this beautiful ghost story, The Chimes. Yeah. A goblin story of some bells that rang an old year out and a new year in. Interesting. Chapter 1, First Quarter. It's called First Quarter. There are not many people, and as it is desirable that a storyteller and a story reader should establish a mutual understanding as soon as possible, I beg it to be noticed that I confine this observation neither to young people nor to little people, but extend it to all conditions of people, little and big, young and old, yet growing up or already growing down again. There are not, I say, many people who would care to sleep in a church. I don't mean at sermon time in warm weather when the thing has actually been done once or twice, but in the night and alone. A great multitude of persons will be violently astonished, I know, by this position in the broad, bold day itself. But it applies to night. It must be argued by night, and I will undertake to maintain it successfully on any gusty winter's night appointed for the purpose, with any one opponent chosen from the rest who will meet me singly in an old churchyard. Mind you, in the night, alone in a churchyard, before an old church door, and will previously empower me to lock him in, if needful, to his satisfaction until morning. To be locked up in an old churchyard from night till morning. Just imagine, reader. For the night wind has a dismal trick of wandering round and round a building of that sort and moaning as it goes, and of trying with its unseen hand the windows and the doors, the night wind, and seeking out some crevices by which to enter, and when it has got in, as one not finding what it seeks, whatever that may be, it wails and howls to issue forth again. And not content with stalking through the aisles and gliding round and round the pillars and tempting the deep organ, soars up to the roof and strives to rend the rafters, then flings itself despairingly upon the stones below, and with the night wind blowing hard, and passes muttering into the vaults. Anon it comes up stealthily and creeps along the walls, seeming to read in whispers the inscriptions sacred to the dead. At At some of these, it breaks out shrilly as with laughter, and at others moans and cries as if it were lamenting. It has a ghostly sound too, lingering within the altar, where it seems to chaunt in its wild way of wrong and murder done, and false gods worshipped in defiance of the tables of the law, which look so fair and smooth, but are so flawed and broken. Ah! Heaven preserve us sitting snugly round the fire. It is an awful voice, that wind at midnight, singing in a church. See the beautiful language of Dickens. But high up in the steeple, there the foul blast roars and whistles. High up in the steeple, where it is free to come and go through many an airy arch and loophole, to twist and twine itself about the giddy stair, and twirl the groaning weathercock, make the very tower shake and shiver. High up in the steeple, where the belfry is, and iron rails are racked with rust, and sheets of lead and copper, shriveled by the changing weather, crackle and heave beneath the unaccustomed tread, and birds stuff shabby nests into corners of old oaken joists and beams, and dust grows old and grey, and speckled spiders, indolent and fat with long security, swing idly to and fro in the vibration of the bells, and never lose their hold upon their thread-spun castles in the air, or climb up sailor-like in quick alarum, or drop upon the ground and ply a score of nimble legs to save one life. Beautiful, beautiful. High up in the steeple of an old church, far above the light and murmur of the town, and far below the flying clouds that shadow it, is the wind and dreary place at night. And high up in the steeple of an old church dwelt the chimes I tell of. So this brings us to the topic of Dickens' story, Chimes. They were old chimes, trust me. Centuries ago, these bells had been baptized by bishops, so many centuries ago that the register of their baptism was lost long before the memory of man, and no one knew their names. They had their godfathers and godmothers, these bells. For my own part, by the way, I would rather incur the responsibility of being godfather to a bell than a boy, and had their silver mugs no doubt besides. But time had mowed down their sponsors, and Henry VIII had melted down their mugs. They now hung nameless and mugless in the church tower. Not speechless though, far from it. They had their clear, loud, lusty sounding voices, had these bells, and far and wide they might be heard upon the wind. Much too sturdy chimes were they to be dependent on the pleasure of the wind. Moreover, for fighting gallantly against it when it took an adverse whim. They would pour their cheerful notes into a listening ear right royally, and bent on being heard on stormy nights by some poor mother watching a sick child, or some lone wife whose husband was at sea. They had been sometimes known to beat a blustering nor'wester, all to fits, as Toby Veck said. For though they chose to call him Trotty Veck, his name was Toby, not Trotty, Toby. And nobody could make it anything else either except Tobias without a special act of parliament. He having been as lawly christened in his day as the bells had been in theirs, though with not quite so much of solemnity or public rejoicing. Talking about Tobias, Trotty they call him. For my part, I confess myself of Toby Veck's belief, for I am sure he had opportunities enough of forming a correct one, and whatever Toby Veck said, I say. And whatever Toby Veck said, I also say. Same thing. And I take my stand by Toby Veck, although he did stand all day long. Poor man, he stood all day long. And weary work it was just outside the church door. In fact, he was a ticket porter, Toby Veck, a ticket porter, waited there for jobs. Poor man. And a breezy, goose-skinned, blue-nosed, red-eyed, stony-toed, tooth-chattering place it was to wait in the winter time, as Toby Veck well knew. The wind came tearing round the corner, especially the east wind, as if it had sallied forth express from the confines of the earth to have a blow at Toby. And oftentimes it seemed to come upon him sooner than it had expected, for bouncing round the corner and passing Toby, it would suddenly wheel round again as if it cried, "Why, he is here! Why, here he is!" Incontinently, his little white apron would be caught up over his head like a naughty boy's garments, and his feeble little cane would be seen to wrestle and struggle unavailingly in his hand, and his legs would undergo tremendous agitation, and Toby himself, all aslant and facing now in this direction, now in that, would be so banged and buffeted and tousled and worried and hustled and lifted off his feet as to render it a state of things but one degree removed from a positive miracle that he wasn't carried up bodily into the air as a colony of frogs or snails or other very portable creatures sometimes are, and rained down again to the great astonishment of the natives on some strange corner of the world where ticket porters are unknown.